The jagged, razor-sharp point of a thorn sliced into the tender skin of Sarah's palm, and she bit back a cry, tasting dust and the metallic tang of her own blood. Each agonizing inch forward through the dense, unyielding pyracantha hedge was a fresh torment, the dry, sun-baked soil abrading her knees, the stiff branches snagging her clothes, her hair. The oppressive mid-afternoon sun beat down relentlessly, amplifying the humiliation. Her pregnant belly, the precious swell that held all their hopes, pressed awkwardly against the unforgiving earth, a constant, vulnerable reminder of what was at stake. Like a peasant, the woman's voice, sharp as shattered glass, echoed in her ears, a soundtrack to this nightmare. Karen. That was her name. A name Sarah had first seen on a bizarre, officious HOA notice about the precise angle of their welcome mat. Now Karen stood sentinel arms, crossed a smug proprietorial air about her as she surveyed her handiwork, her brightly patterned floral dress, an obscenely cheerful blot against the manicured green. The public sidewalk, their intended path, lay clear and unobstructed mere feet away, but Karen had deemed it closed for vital HOA maintenance. A claim laughably false given the utter absence of tools crew or any sign of work. Only Karen. Karen the human barricade, a self-appointed empress of Elm Street. Sarah had tried to reason with her. Please, she'd begun, her voice polite despite the simmering indignation. I just need to get by. I live just down the street. My doctor's appointment ran late and the heat. Karen's eyes, cold and dismissive, had raked over Sarah. The sidewalk is closed. Community rules. If you're so desperate to pass, use the bushes. It might teach you some respect for private property boundaries. Be a neighbor. Mr. Henderson's timid son had started to say something. Now Ms. Smith, perhaps. But Karen had whirled on him, her voice like a whip. Are you questioning HOA directives, young man? Perhaps your father's non-compliant rose bushes need another formal review. The young man had blanched and retreated, muttering an apology. But this is a public sidewalk, Sarah had insisted, gesturing. And those bushes are full of thorns. I'm pregnant. It's not safe. A flicker of something dark and unpleasant had crossed Karen's face. Pregnant. She'd drawn the word out, her gaze lingering on Sarah's stomach with an almost predatory intensity. Then you should be more careful where you wander. The rules apply to everyone. No exceptions for your condition. Now, are you going to dawdle here all day or find an alternative route? The implication had been clear: the bushes, or turn back. Turning back meant a much longer circuitous route in the sweltering heat, something Sarah, in her 7th month and already feeling faint, couldn't contemplate. So with a mounting sense of disbelief, fury, and a desperate need to reach the sanctuary of her home, Sarah had dropped to her knees. Now looking back through a momentary gap in the foliage, she saw Karen still watching, her expression one of profound satisfaction. Mark. The thought of him was an anchor. He'd be home soon from his job. He'd always been vague, just working with the city, mostly outdoors, green spaces and such. He dealt with difficult people, regularly diffusing tense situations. He'd know how to handle Karen. He would be incandescent with rage naturally, but his anger was always controlled, channeled into methodical action. But he wasn't here now. Now it was just her, the thorns, and Karen's victorious sneer. Another branch, thicker than the others, scraped her shin, drawing a fresh line of fire. A small choked sob escaped her. She wouldn't break down, not completely. She wouldn't give Karen that final perverse satisfaction. Just a little further. The cloying scent of dust and crushed bitter leaves filled her senses, a miserable incense for this absurd ritual of degradation. The familiar sound of Mark's car turning onto their street reached her just as she finally stumbled free of the hedge's cruel embrace, emerging onto the sidewalk like a shipwrecked survivor washing ashore. The sight that met his eyes, Sarah, disheveled clothes torn and stained with dirt, and blood streaks of tears cutting through the grime on her face, made his blood run cold. Adrenaline surged sharp and potent. He slammed the gear shift into park, the car lurching slightly, and was out in a flash, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs as he sprinted towards her. Sarah, my God, what happened? Are you hurt? The baby is the baby, okay? She collapsed into his embrace, her body racked with tremors. Mark. Oh, Mark, it was awful. The words came in gasps, punctuated by sobs, painting a horrifying picture. Karen, the deliberately blocked sidewalk, the contemptuous order, the agonizing crawl. The sneering, unforgettable insult, a glacial fury, precise and terrifyingly calm, settled deep within Mark. His gaze swept down the sidewalk. Karen was there 100 feet away now, engaged in the theatrical innocence of watering a petunia bed that wasn't even on her property line, the hose held with a delicate, almost artistic grip. He gently guided Sarah towards their front door, his arm a steel band of support around her. "Go inside, sweetheart. Wash up. Get yourself a cold drink. I need to have a word with Ms. Smith." His voice was low, dangerously soft. Sarah knew that tone. It was the prelude to an unstoppable force, meeting an immovable object, and Mark, in these moments, was always the force. Inside their small, usually cheerful bungalow, a sanctuary they had lovingly prepared for their expanding family. Sarah sank onto the plush sofa, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her feeling weak, nauseated, and utterly violated. They had chosen this neighborhood for its charm, its mature trees, its promise of a close-knit community, and its convenient proximity to the sprawling regional park. The Homeowners Association had been a footnote, its bylaws seemingly standard and loosely enforced. Karen, a woman whose property abutted the park, and who wielded her ill-defined HOA influence like a scepter, had been until this afternoon, a mere background irritation, a passive-aggressive note concerning the precise alignment of their recycling bin, a lingering stare if their lawn dared exceed the unspoken limit. This, however, this was a monstrous escalation, a leap into a chasm of calculated cruelty. Sarah's due date was less than 2 months away. The stress was the last thing she needed. Mark walked with measured, deliberate steps back down the sun-drenched sidewalk. Karen looked up as he approached, a saccharine smile materializing on her face. "Why, hello there. Such a lovely afternoon for a stroll, isn't it?" Her eyes flicked past him as if searching for Sarah. "Ms. Smith, I believe you just had an interaction with my wife, Sarah." Mark said, his voice devoid of inflection, his gaze steady. Karen's smile tightened. "Your wife?" "Oh, the pregnant one. Yes, she passed by, quite determined to take an unorthodox shortcut through Mrs. Henderson's hedge. Some people simply have no regard for established pathways. Councilman Richards himself was saying just last week how we need to maintain community aesthetics to keep property values up." A muscle in Mark's jaw clenched. Councilman Richards. The name rang a distant bell, someone known for being amenable to certain influential residents. "She informed me that you obstructed the public sidewalk and compelled her to crawl through that pyracantha hedge." Karen let out a tinkling, dismissive laugh. "Compelled her? My dear man, don't be so melodramatic. I simply advised her the sidewalk was temporarily unavailable due to urgent HOA landscaping initiatives, all for community safety. If she then chose to scrabble through dense foliage, that's hardly my burden. Besides that, hedge was unruly. She probably did it a service." "There is no landscaping work authorized for this section," Karen, Mark stated. "I reviewed the HOA bulletins, and this is a public right-of-way. You have no legal authority to obstruct it." Karen drew herself up, feigned innocence evaporating. "I am the chairperson of the HOA Beautification Committee. I have every right to maintain standards. Perhaps if your wife and you adhered to those standards instead of flouting guidelines, these misunderstandings wouldn't occur." Her gaze flicked dismissively over Mark's attire. "Frankly, your accusatory tone is offensive. You're newcomers. Learn the proper channels." Mark took a slow breath. "My wife is 7 months pregnant. What you did was reckless and hazardous. Those thorns could have caused serious injury, infection, even premature labor." "Oh, for heaven's sake," Karen rolled her eyes. "A few scratches. She'll survive. Perhaps a valuable lesson was learned about respecting regulations." She then turned her back, a clear dismissal, resuming her watering. Mark stood there, the cold fury solidifying into grim resolve. This wasn't just a dispute. This was calculated harassment, endangerment. Karen's arrogance told him this was a pattern. He walked back, his mind already shifting, adopting the methodical evidence-gathering mode he employed in his professional life. The days that followed were a tightly coiled spring. Sarah's physical wounds healed, but the emotional trauma lingered, the fear of encountering Karen a palpable weight. Mark, with quiet intensity, began his counteroffensive. His first stop was Mrs. Henderson. The elderly woman was terrified. "She's dreadful, Mr. Johnson," she'd whispered. "Always finding fault. She threatened me about my roses. Said she'd report them for blight if I didn't let her oversee my hedge maintenance. She even mentioned how friendly she is with Councilman Richards at City Hall, insinuating he'd back her up on any complaint." This connection, however tenuous, added a new layer of concern for Mark. Then the first official salvo from Karen and HOA notice, citing community-managed flora preservation and a $200 fine for the destruction of Mrs. Henderson's pyracantha. "She's fining us for what she forced me to do," Sarah whispered, pale. Mark scanned the notice signed by Karen Smith, Chairperson Beautification and Community Standards Committee. "She's audacious, doubling down." He scanned it, starting his evidence file, Sarah's time-stamped account photos of her injuries, Mrs. Henderson's statement transcribed though she was too scared to sign yet, and the fraudulent fine. A call to city planning confirmed no pending maintenance for that sidewalk. A few nights later, the escalation took a more sinister turn. They woke to the sound of hissing. All 4 tires on Mark's personal car parked in their driveway had been slashed. Nestled beside the deflated rubber was a small broken piece of what looked like a ceramic angel, identical to the one in Sarah's memorial garden for their deceased cat Marmalade. Later that morning, Sarah discovered the garden itself had been vandalized. The forget-me-nots uprooted, the miniature rose bush snapped, and the stone angel smashed into pieces. "This isn't just HOA nonsense anymore, Mark," Sarah cried, clutching the fragments of the angel. This is someone trying to break us." Mark's jaw tightened. This was direct criminal intimidation. He meticulously photographed the damage and filed a police report, though he knew such vandalism was hard to trace. The potluck attack followed Karen loudly denouncing certain new residents to her cronies, her gaze venomous. Neighbors loyal to Karen pointedly ignored them. Then another notice. Violation unapproved statuary and non-compliant sentimental landscaping. Immediate removal required. Fine $350. This after the vandalism was a new level of cruel mockery. "She's trying to eradicate every piece of our joy," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "It's like she wants to sanitize us out of existence." But the attack and Karen's subsequent fine sparked something in Sarah. "Mark," she said later that evening, her voice firm despite her tears, "I can't just sit here. That woman, she expects me to be a victim. I won't be." From then on, Sarah began to meticulously document every interaction, every slight, every piece of mail. She started reviewing the confusing HOA covenants herself, highlighting sections Karen seemed to be misinterpreting or selectively enforcing. Mark's investigation intensified. He delved into archived HOA minutes, cross-referenced property records, and spoke with former board members. A pattern of complaints against newer residents or those who questioned Karen emerged. Many had moved. Whispers of mismanaged HOA funds and contracts awarded to companies linked to Karen's relatives, often at inflated prices, grew. The HOA president, Arthur Abernathy, seemed utterly cowed by Karen. Mark discovered Karen had faced a lawsuit a few years back in a neighboring county from a former HOA she'd terrorized. The case was dismissed officially due to insufficient concrete evidence, but rumors persisted that key witnesses had suddenly become unavailable or changed their minds. This prior escape from accountability clearly fueled Karen's current boldness. The next week, Karen targeted Mark's employment. An emergency HOA executive bulletin, signed solely by Karen, restricted on-street parking requiring a new unavailable permit. Unpermitted vehicles, subject to immediate towing. The very next day, a garish pink handwritten ticket appeared on Mark's city-issued but personally used for work SUV violation of emergency parking mandate 001. Fee $50 payable to beautification committee within 24 hours to avoid towing. "This is blatant interference," Mark said, voice dangerously thin. "If I can't park my official vehicle near my home, it impacts my ability to respond to emergencies. She's deliberately targeting my job, my livelihood." Sarah wrung her hands. "It's like she's tightening a net. Where will it stop? We have less than 6 weeks until the baby, Mark. We need this resolved." "She's overplaying her hand," Mark said, eyes glinting. She's intoxicated by power, and she still has no idea who she's truly dealing with. Chetio, he had intentionally kept his full title and supervisory authority vague. He'd hoped for reason. Now it was time for a different approach. He worried briefly about the Councilman Richards connection. If Karen truly had a powerful ally, a public fight could get messy, even affect his standing if Richards was influential in city resource allocation. But Sarah's pale, determined face, the memory of her crawling through thorns, and the thought of their fast-approaching child solidified his resolve. Late one evening, using his professional access to city planning databases and public land registries, Mark unearthed the critical link. The narrow strip of land with the sidewalk and Mrs. Henderson's hedge was a public utility and access easement. Due to its proximity to the regional park, it fell under the concurrent jurisdictional oversight of the City Parks Department for public safety, accessibility, and environmental protection. This meant Karen had harassed Sarah on land where Mark's own department had a vested legal interest and authority. He also found concrete evidence of emergency beautification projects and critical infrastructure repairs consistently over budget, with payments to perennial perfection landscapers registered to Karen's unemployed brother-in-law, an individual with no prior experience. The urgent landscaping work was a phantom. He laid it out for Sarah. She's breaking actual laws, harassment, reckless endangerment, and I strongly suspect financial fraud. Sarah, who had been quietly listening to old HOA meeting recordings she'd found online, suddenly stiffened. Mark listened to this. She played a snippet from a meeting where a resident questioned an unusually high landscaping bill. Karen's voice smooth and condescending. My dear Mr. Davies' perennial perfection is highly recommended, and Councilman Richards himself assured me of their excellent work on other city-affiliated projects. Sometimes quality costs a little more, but it ensures our community standards, Sarah then confessed. A few days after the vandalism, Karen had approached her in the front yard, ostensibly to offer sympathy for the unfortunate incident with the car. Her tone, however, was laced with veiled threats. It's a shame, isn't it, dear? When people stir up trouble sometimes, unpredictable things happen. Best to let sleeping dogs lie for everyone's safety, especially with a baby on the way. Sarah, her heart pounding, had discreetly activated the voice recorder on her phone. She now had Karen's thinly veiled threat recorded. I didn't know if it was enough or if I should tell you, Sarah whispered. I was scared she'd find out. Mark hugged her fiercely. Sarah, you're incredible. This is vital. The annual HOA meeting is next Tuesday, Mark said, tapping the agenda, already listing Karen's new beautification levies. It's usually sleepy. This year it'll be different. Raggio. He gestured to his now bulging evidence file, affidavits, photos, financial discrepancies, city ordinances, land maps, and now Sarah's recording. He arranged a confidential meeting with his direct supervisor Jenkins, outlining everything. Jenkins, a stickler for protocol but staunch on public safety, gave his full backing, especially given the easement jurisdiction. Mark also consulted an old academy acquaintance, now a detective in white-collar crime, ensuring his presentation would be legally sound for a formal referral. The community hall on Tuesday evening buzzed. The turnout was unprecedented. Word had spread the Johnsons were challenging Karen Smith. Karen sat enthroned, flanked by a nervous Abernathy and the HOA treasurer, radiating imperious confidence, shooting venomous glares at Mark and Sarah. Abernathy opened the meeting rambling about achievements, Karen's overpriced repairs. And now, new business. Karen seized the floor. Thank you, Mr. Abernathy. I move to formally censure Mark and Sarah Johnson for a pattern of flagrant violations, destruction of community flora, unauthorized statuary, and disregard for parking regulations endangering pedestrian safety. She paused. Furthermore, I propose an immediate 50% increase in all fines for such serious violations. Some people need to be taught a firm, financially impactful lesson. Applause from her cronies. Others shifted uneasily. Mark rose. Mr. Abernathy, members, before a vote, I'd like to address these accusations and present pertinent information. Karen scoffed. Oh, here we go. More tiresome excuses. Mark ignored her. My wife and I have indeed received several notices from Ms. Smith. Ms. Smith, you accused my wife of destroying community flora. The truth on July 14th is that you obstructed a public sidewalk. When my 7 months pregnant wife requested passage, you verbally abused her, refused access, and maliciously compelled her to crawl through Mrs. Henderson's thorny pyracantha hedge, stating, and I quote from her sworn affidavit, that she should move through there like a peasant. This resulted in lacerations, bruising, distress, and risked mother and child. A collective gasp. Faces turned to Karen, shocked. Karen flushed crimson. A preposterous, slanderous lie she chose to go through that hedge. I was overseeing vital community maintenance. Vital maintenance no one witnessed with no city permits or HOA work order. Mark countered, holding up photos of Sarah's injuries and torn dress. These are the results of your maintenance. CO. He detailed each bogus fine, the Memorial Garden harassment, the punitive parking rules presenting counter-evidence notices, juxtaposed with city ordinances, photos, land maps, and actual HOA bylaws Karen had twisted. This is an outrage, Karen sputtered, lurching up. Baseless attacks on my dedicated service. One resident, a Mr. Davies, stood. Actually, Ms. Smith, I recall you mentioning Councilman Richards, vouching for perennial perfection. I contacted his office. They have no record of him ever recommending that company, nor are they listed as a city-affiliated contractor. Karen's face went pale. That's a misunderstanding. Mark continued. My investigation revealed a disturbing pattern, Ms. Smith. Not of our misconduct, but of your systematic abuse of authority-targeted harassment and highly questionable financial practices. He presented his overview of inflated no-bid contracts to her brother-in-law's shell company, Perennial Perfection Landscapers, showcasing invoices for substandard work at double or triple standard rates. The murmurs swelled. Mr. Abernathy looked physically ill. And as for illegally obstructing a public sidewalk and recklessly endangering a pregnant citizen, Mark's voice dropped. That land falls under a public utility and access easement with shared oversight, including the jurisdiction of the City Parks Department for Public Safety and Access. He reached into his jacket, slowly withdrawing his official Parks Police shield and ID. My name is Mark Johnson. I am the Parks Police Supervisor for the Western District, encompassing this neighborhood and the adjacent park. Ms. Smith, your actions on July 14th constituted several actionable offenses under city ordinances and state statutes, including Section 243E of the Penal Code, willful harassment, and Section 384A, reckless endangerment. Absolute stunned silence. Every eye was on the badge. Karen stared, mouth agape, disbelief rage, then dawning, consuming fear washing over her. Furthermore, Mark said, his gaze sweeping the room, Sarah, would you play that recording? Sarah, her hand surprisingly steady, pressed play on her phone. Karen's voice filled the hall, smooth, menacing. It's a shame, isn't it, dear, when people stir up trouble sometimes. Unpredictable things happen. Best to let sleeping dogs lie for everyone's safety, especially with a baby on the way. The silence that followed was heavier, colder. Then Mrs. Henderson stood, her voice trembling but clear. She did that to me too, years ago. Threatened to have my healthy maple tree condemned, claiming it blocked a view corridor that never existed just because she didn't like the leaves. I had to pay to have it cut down. Another resident stood. She fined me repeatedly for my children's basketball hoop, citing rules that weren't even in the bylaws, until I finally took it down. One by one, nearly a dozen residents, emboldened by Mark's revelation and Sarah's recording, stood and shared their own stories of Karen's intimidation, unjust fines, and abuse of power. The atmosphere crackled with released anger and a newfound solidarity. Mark concluded, I have a comprehensive report detailing these incidents, signed witness statements, and a forensic analysis of financial discrepancies. This will be delivered to the district attorney, the city controller's fraud investigation unit, and the internal affairs division of the police department tomorrow morning. Forcing a pregnant woman to crawl through thorns, Ms. Smith, is not something my department or any civilized community will tolerate. He turned to Abernathy. I trust this HOA will initiate its own immediate internal review and suspend Ms. Smith pending official investigations. Karen Smith sank into her chair, shattered. The arrogance gone, replaced by raw terror. Mrs. Henderson began to applaud, then another, until the hall filled with a thunderous ovation, a sound of liberation. The aftermath was swift. Before the meeting adjourned, a motion from the floor called for Karen's immediate suspension. It passed unanimously. Karen's few remaining allies abstained, eager to distance themselves. The next morning, Mark delivered his report. The DA's office assigned a prosecutor almost immediately. Fraud investigators began interviewing residents and subpoenaed HOA records. Karen Smith's reign was over. Relief washed over Elm Street. Neighbors approached Mark and Sarah with apologies and their own stories. Mrs. Henderson brought an apple pie, tears of gratitude in her eyes. "You've given us our peace back, Supervisor Johnson." The atmosphere transformed. The legal process moved forward. Karen Smith was arrested. Felony reckless endangerment, misdemeanor harassment, and felony counts of grand larceny by embezzlement and financial fraud. Her assets were frozen. The beautification committee was disbanded. Abernathy resigned. An interim committee, including a retired accountant and a local attorney, was elected, initiating a full forensic audit and bylaw overhaul. Weeks later, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Ethan Mark Johnson. Their home, once a point of anxiety, filled with joy. The community rallied with genuine warmth. Nearly 8 months later, Karen Smith, facing overwhelming evidence, accepted a plea bargain, guilty of reckless endangerment, multiple harassment counts, and felony embezzlement. Her sentence: suspended incarceration 5 years, stringent probation, mandatory anger management, full financial restitution, over $70,000, and extensive community service far from Elm Street. Her assets were liquidated to repay the HOA. Her house was sold at auction. Elm Street had been reborn. The new HOA fostered transparency and respect. Mark continued his work, his integrity earning widespread admiration. Sarah, with baby Ethan, walked the sidewalks without fear. Near the now neatly trimmed pyracantha hedge, someone, it was rumored to be Mrs. Henderson, with Sarah's quiet approval, had placed a small, tasteful stepping stone discreetly engraved, "Elm Street Pathway to Community. Courage blooms here." The scars on Sarah's arms had faded, but the memory of their ordeal and the courage it had summoned from them and their neighbors remained. The thorns are gone. Sarah often thought, watching Ethan take his first wobbly steps on the sidewalk Karen had once tried to deny her, but the strength we found that will always be part of this path. The air felt cleaner, the future brighter, and the hard-won peace was a testament to the enduring power of ordinary people standing together against malice.